Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 742, and today is January 9th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot of news to talk about on today's show, but before we get into it, just want to go over some quick scheduling here for the rest of the week. Tonight, tomorrow, there will be a new episode of the Kyle Anzalone Show. You could subscribe to that channel. It is the first link in the show notes page. And hoping I will have my colleague from antiwar.com, Dave DeCamp, join me so I could interview him about some of the recent work he's doing and our thoughts on the Trump administration. And then over the weekend, I'm planning to put out a bonus episode of Conflicts of Interest. Co-host Connor Freeman has a new op-ed out at the Libertarian Institute. I want to ask him some questions about that. All right, with that, as always, you can find everything I do by following me on X or Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. I work at the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com, so my articles, my shows, and most of everything I do end up at both websites. At the Institute, I'm the news editor, and at antiwar.com, I'm the opinion editor. And then, of course, this show is available on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee for the video version, and up anywhere you could listen to audio podcasts. Let's get into it, because the first article today is one I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on January 8th. This article is titled U.S. Sanctions Top Official in NATO Members' Government. So Washington has sanctioned a top official in the Hungarian government alleging corruption. Budapest fired back, saying the designation was an act of personal revenge by the outgoing Joe Biden administration. Anatol Rogin, a member of the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's cabinet, and I believe the chief of his office, was placed under sanctions by the Treasury Department on Tuesday. Acting Undersecretary of the Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, Bradley T. Smith, said the United States will not hesitate to hold accountable individuals like Rogin, who use the power of their office to illicitly enrich themselves and their cronies at the expense of the country and their fellow citizens. However, Hungary believes the corruption is just an excuse, as the Biden administration is seeking personal revenge against Budapest. The Hungarian foreign minister said Budapest would take the issue up with Washington after President-elect Donald Trump returns to office later this month. Orban has proven to be a thorn in the side of the Biden administration's attempt to have consensus in NATO and the European Union for supporting Ukraine. Budapest has opposed EU loans to Ukraine and sanctions on Russia. Also, it denounced Biden's decision to let Kiev hit Russia with long-range American missiles. Additionally, Orban used his position as head of the European Union in the second half of 2024 to attempt to broker a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. He also traveled to Mar-a-Lago to meet with then-candidate Trump. Orban's close relationship with Trump may help him lobby for sanctions relief regarding Rogin. And so I wouldn't be surprised if these sanctions last, about 11 or 12 more days here. All right. Next up, moving into some news on the next up here is a story about the Middle East, but it's about one of Trump's posts. This one I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on January 8th. Trump posts video slamming Netanyahu and U.S. Middle East policy. So President-elect Donald Trump shared a video featuring Columbia professor Jeffrey Sachs sharply criticizing U.S. Middle East policy and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's role in leading the U.S. into wars. In the video, Sachs says Netanyahu is, quote, a deep, dark son of a bitch who led the U.S. into multiple follies in the Middle East and now wants America to fight a war with Iran on Israel's behalf. So to quote from the video here that was posted on Trump's Truth Social account, Netanyahu had from 1995 onwards the theory that the only way they're going to get rid of Hamas and Hezbollah is by toppling the governments that support them. That's Iraq, Iran, and Syria. The guy's nothing if not obsessive. He's gotten us into endless wars, and because of the power of all this in U.S. politics, he's gotten his way. In 2002, Netanyahu gave an address to Congress to help sell Americans on going to war in Iraq. He said, "If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that you will have enormous positive reverberations on the region." And I think that people are sitting right next door in Iran, young people and many others will say the time of such regimes, of such despots is gone. The Iraq Civil War resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of murdered Iraqi civilians, thousands of dead Americans, trillions of dollars spent, and the government in Baghdad is more aligned with Tehran now than when Saddam was in charge. Additionally, the power vacuum created by the fall of Saddam's government led to the rise of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Islamic State. As of 2019, a majority of Americans believe the war in Iraq was not worth fighting and a mistake. And interestingly enough, I was, trying to look for some updated polling to see how much that number had moved over the past 5 years. And it turns out that as soon as the American people, and particularly U.S. veterans, started polling against the Iraq war, in an overwhelming fashion, the pollsters got uninterested in conducting those polls anymore. So who knows how much it is now? It could be 75% or more of Americans that think that war was an absolute scam and a joke and we should have never gone into it. So after the U.S. deposed Saddam, the Iraqi people elected a Shiite-led government that favored stronger ties with Tehran. Washington and its Middle East allies then became concerned that there now existed a, quote, Shiite crescent in the region stretching from Iran to Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Professor Sachs explains that President Barack Obama then ordered the CIA to launch an operation that supported Sunni militant groups in Syria in an attempt to overthrow President Bashar al-Assad. At the same time, the Defense Intelligence Agency warned that the CIA's support for Sunni groups would result in the creation of an Islamic caliphate. Satz's criticisms of U.S. foreign policy and Israel's influence in Washington's policies have resulted in attacks from high-ranking Israeli officials, such as Diaspora Affairs Minister who said that Sachs was in a group of, quote, fringe Holocaust deniers, conspiracy theorists, and blood libel enthusiasts who oppose the state of Israel. I mean, this isn't true. He's just somebody who's an expert on U.S. foreign policy and, weighs in and gives his opinion on it. And because it doesn't align with Israel, Israel doesn't like it. So in the video posted to Trump's Truth Social account, a 2-minute compilation of a longer interview was posted by Wall Street Apes. Sachs slams the U.S. media for failing to cover the CIA's support for the opposition to Assad, noting that the New York Times only mentioned the operation dubbed Timber Sycamore 3 times. Trump has labeled himself the best friend of Israel and has promised to increase support for the Jewish state after he returns to the White House. And so, in ways, posting this video seems a little bit baffling. The way I'm kind of making sense of it is maybe Trump didn't watch it, or he only watched the first about minute of the video where Sachs is talking about Syria and Obama's policy, and then mentions the New York Times, and afterwards is when he gets into Netanyahu and Israel's role in leading the U.S. into these stupid wars. And so maybe that has something to do with it. It's really interesting, at least, that he did post this video. And one would hope that maybe there's a way for Professor Sachs to sit down and have a conversation with Donald Trump. I'm not saying that he's going to necessarily be able to fit Trump's policies, but this man is going to be the sitting president in just about a week and a half here. And so the better influences on him, the better the situation will likely be for the rest of us. All right, now moving on to discuss some of the ongoing horrors in Gaza. This one from DateToCampAntiWar.com, January 8th. Israel killed 74 children in Gaza in the first week of 2025. So the U.S.-backed Israeli attacks on Gaza killed at least 74 children in just the first week of 2025, according to the UN's child relief agency, UNICEF. The statement said, children have reportedly been killed in several mass casualty events, including nighttime attacks in Gaza City, Khan Yunis, and Al-Mawasi, a unilaterally designated safe zone in the south. On Tuesday, an Israeli airstrike on al-Mawasi in South Gaza killed 5 displaced children who were sheltering in tents. The IDF has repeatedly bombed Mawasi, despite it being called a humanitarian safe zone, and telling all the Palestinians that they have to go there or else they'll be considered combatants and killed in other areas. So, Palestinian children are also dying due to the conditions caused by the Israeli siege and relentless bombing campaign. UNICEF said that since December 26th, 8 infants and newborns, again, that's 8 infants and newborns, have died of hypothermia, so froze to death, a major threat to young children who are unable to regulate their body temperatures. Gaza's health ministry said in December of 2023 that 17,000 children have been killed in the genocidal war, a number that does not include those missing and wounded under the rubble or indirect deaths caused by the siege. Newborn babies are especially vulnerable since many have been born prematurely due to health conditions of their mothers. Palestinian mothers in Gaza also struggle to make milk, and there have been shortages of formula and other baby products. In October, the New York Times published accounts from American healthcare workers who volunteered in Gaza, including many who worked with babies. Dr. Amen Oda, a pediatrician from Texas, said, "I worked in a neonatal ICU. Several infants died every week due to a lack of medical supplies and appropriate nutrition. We had to make tough decisions about which very sick babies would be on the ventilator due to a lack of equipment. I saw a family bring their dead 3-day-old infant who had been living in a tent." So despite the slaughter of children and deaths of so many baby newborns under the siege, the Biden administration has continued to provide military aid and political support to Israel. President Biden is reportedly planning to approve one more major arms deal worth $8 billion for Israel before he leaves office. And this comes as, look, 74 in a week, that's 10 a day. They're murdering 10 children. 10 children every single day. And honestly, that's probably a reduced number from some of the horror shows that we have seen throughout this conflict. All right, next up here, the U.S. issues licenses allowing transactions with Syria HTS-led government. So this is from January 6th, date to camp. The Treasury Department on Monday issued a 6-month general license to waive some sanctions on Syria to allow transactions with the new Syrian government that's led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, an offshoot of al-Qaeda that's designated by the U.S. government as a foreign terrorist organization. For years, the U.S. imposed crippling sanctions on Syria that were designed to prevent the country's reconstruction. The sanctions, which have a devastating impact on Syrian civilians, were a part of the regime change effort against former President Bashar al-Assad, which ultimately succeeded when he fled the country on December 8th due to the HTS offensive. In a press release, the Treasury Department acknowledged the scope of U.S. sanctions on Syria, saying the country was one of the most comprehensively sanctioned jurisdictions. The license does not lift any sanction, but allows certain transactions with the HTS-led government. According to the document, the general license allowed transactions in support of sales, supply, storage, or donations of energy, including petroleum products, natural gas, electricity, or to or within Syria, and the transactions are ordinarily incident and necessary to process the transfer of non-commercial personal remittance to Syria, including through the Central Bank of Syria. So the Treasury Department said that the purpose of the license is to ensure U.S. sanctions do not impede activities to basic human needs, including the provision of public service or humanitarian service, an acknowledgement that the U.S. government has been impeding humanitarian goods. And so, look, I don't want to sound too pro-sanctions here and to say that I think that the sanctions should continue to exist against the Syrian government now that HTS is in charge. Because, I've been against sanctions the whole time. And so I guess I'm for lifting them now in the sense that I don't think sanctions really hurt the central government, the leadership of the countries, and they really do hurt the people. That being said, that the United States for years and years and years tried to prevent any goods, any products whatsoever from reaching Syria, and are now allowing personal remittance to be transferred to the Syrian central bank, which will most certainly be taxed by the Anzalone Jolani government and more money inserted into the coffers of the terrorist organization certainly seems like a very strange step to take from the perspective of the United States government, and extremely dangerous. Now, there is a little bit of nuance to this. This one from Dave DeCamp, the day after that one, which explains, sure, we're gave a waiver and we're allowing some business to take place with the HTS-controlled Syrian central bank, but we're going to make sure that everybody knows that HTS is still a terrorist organization. So the Washington Post on Wednesday said that President Biden will not revoke the terror designation for HTS. That means that Syria's de facto leader and founder of HTS, Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, who has been going by his real name, Ahmed al-Shara, will still be considered a terrorist by the U.S. government for the remainder of the Biden administration. Despite Jolani being labeled a terrorist due to his al-Qaeda history, high-level U.S. government officials met with him recently and removed a $10 million bounty that was on his head. The Biden administration also issued a general license waiving sanctions to allow some transactions with his government. So a very interesting middle of the road that the Biden administration is choosing to take there. All right, now a quick update on Lebanon. This one from our pal Jason Ditz over at antiwar.com. U.S. envoy claims Israel will still withdraw from southern Lebanon, but won't say when. So U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein is trying to reassure Lebanon and the rest of the world that Israeli troops will withdraw from southern Lebanon, despite repeated media reports that Israel is planning to announce they're going to remain. The Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, said yesterday that Israel might scrap the ceasefire entirely. The Israel-Lebanon ceasefire stipulated that Israel withdraw from Lebanon within 60 days. We're now 42 days into the ceasefire, and Israel has just started to leave a second town. So far, Israel has only pulled out of one. Israel leaving those two towns isn't necessarily a step in the right direction, as Israel has entered more than 2 additional Lebanese towns since the ceasefire began. Israel now holds more territory than when the deal was put into place. Reporters from LBC International entered one of the towns Israel was supposed to withdraw from and documented widespread destruction. That's no surprise, as military bulldozers have been systematically demolishing civilian homes and other infrastructure in Israeli-occupied areas of Lebanon. I don't think the destruction is quite the level of Gaza, but is still very significant. Hochstein's assurances that Israel will leave Lebanon conspicuously failed to mention a departure date, as if increasingly apparent Israel won't be leaving during the 60-day window. So Hochstein's comments don't mean much, because he's going to be out of office well before Israel ever has to make a decision, and they're likely going to stay. So there's been some pretty significant fighting in Syria between the Turkish-backed forces and the U.S.-backed SDF, that's the Syrian Kurds, with 280 being killed, including about 200 fighters of the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army. These are a mix of jihadists and non-jihadist Sunni groups that Turkey is looking to use to push the Syrian Kurds further and further away from the Turkish border, and maybe just outright steal that territory from Syria. About 50 Kurdish fighters and 25 civilians, including women and children, were killed in the fighting. Now, Turkey threatens new cross-border operations against Syrian Kurds following that fighting. So the Kurdish-backed self-proclaimed Syrian National Army has been struggling in recent offensive against the U.S.-backed Kurdish SDF. Reportedly, substantial reinforcements are now being sent to the outskirts of Kobani. But perhaps more significantly, Turkey is threatening new cross-border operations against the SDF. The foreign minister insisted Tuesday that Turkey would do whatever is necessary against the Kurds, up to and including military operations. Turkey has been building up its military presence on the Syrian border for weeks, while demanding the Kurds disarm and the U.S. stop backing the Kurds in general. Concurrently, Turkey has carried out artillery and drone strikes against Kurdish targets. Turkey's drone strikes seem to be focused on an attempt to prevent the SDF from sending in reinforcements, particularly around the Tishrim Dam. Drones have been attacking vehicles generally, including civilian ones in this area. Turkish artillery is also targeting the area around a bridge in the area. The bridge crossing the Euphrates River is upstream from the dam. The bridge is the closest one to the dam, and the attacks are meant to prevent Kurdish reinforcements from crossing it. It west into the area, so they're trying to basically prevent the Kurdish forces from crossing the Euphrates River and being able to reinforce Manbij, Kobani, and other cities. So we will see what happens in the coming days if Turkey continues to move forward with these military operations. All right, another one from Jason Ditz here. Israeli troops beat arrest French journalists as they expand South Syria presence. So Israeli troops are advancing deeper into southern Syria, where they are occupying a growing amount of territory and have been expelling Syrian civilians from the area. Foreign media has been trying to offer more coverage of those operations. A French journalist, Salvien Mertesader, has been among those in Syria covering the Israeli invasion, but was beaten by Israeli troops and captured today alongside a Syrian lawyer. Israeli officials claimed the journalist had gotten too close to Israeli troops in a village. The journalist has reportedly been released by Israel after 5 hours in Israeli custody, blindfolded and on his knees. Israeli troops called him a mercenary and confiscated his camera's memory cards. They also reportedly took $200 in cash from his lawyer. So the area he was covering is on Highway 7 in southern Syria. It has been a topic of recent media reports as Israel has occupied villages and expelled the civilian population in the area. They've also destroyed possessions in multiple homes, including reportedly burning Qurans. They have also set up barricades and closed Highway 7 in the area. There's also reports of Israeli troops forcing their way deeper into other towns and villages. One resident said Israeli troops forced him to enter the cultural center first during one of their raids, so they're using him as a human shield, and they had him smash up the doors in the center along with damaging electronic equipment. The photographs of Israeli troops in the town ironically came from the journalist and was taken before he was arrested. And so maybe that's even why they arrested him, is because he was documenting some of the things they didn't want the world to see that they're doing. All right, a couple of quick stories on Africa before we wrap it up here. U.S. launches airstrikes in Somalia, claims 10 al-Shabaab fighters killed. So U.S. AFRICOM Command reported on Tuesday that its forces launched an airstrike in southern Somalia on December 31st that killed 10 al-Shabaab militants. The command said the strike was in a town about 35 kilometers west of the southern port city of Kismayo. AFRICOM said that its initial post-strike assessment found that no civilians were harmed, though the Pentagon is notorious for hiding civilian casualties in Somalia. So AFRICOM framed the attack as collective self-defense airstrike since it was launched in support of the Mogadishu-based government's forces fighting on the ground. In addition to the airstrike, U.S. forces supported Somali forces by evacuating soldiers that were attacked while fighting the terrorist group. So the strike was the second that AFRICOM launched in December. The last U.S. attack took place on December 24th, the first known U.S. airstrike in Somalia since July 15th. AFRICOM claimed that the December 24th strike killed another senior al-Shabaab leader and another militant. The renewed U.S. airstrikes have come as the U.S.-backed government has been losing power in Jubaland, southernmost federal state of Somalia. The U.S.-backed government rejected the region's November election results, leading to the region suspending relations with Mogadishu. And the Somali state has really been cracking up and breaking up over the past decade or so, and so this could be a further piece of that. All right. So next up and last up here, State Department accuses RSF of committing genocide in Sudan. So on Tuesday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken accused the Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, of committing a genocide in Sudan's civil war, and announced sanctions on the RSF leader Mohammed Hamadan Diago Musa, or as he's known, Hemeti. So since war broke out between Hemeti's RSF and the Sudanese armed forces led by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan in April of 2023, at least tens of thousands have been killed and millions are facing acute food shortages, with an estimated 638,000 already facing famine. Atrocities have been committed by both sides, and Blinken has previously determined both the RSF and the SAF have committed war crimes. The RSF and its allied militias have also been accused of carrying out massacres of civilians. So Blinken said in an interview, the RSF and its allied militants have systematically murdered men and boys, even infants, on an ethnic basis, and deliberately targeted women and girls from ethnic groups for rape and other forms of brutal sexual violence. And, he could have said, started this out with the IDF as well, but he laughs when anybody says that that's a genocide. So Blinken said that the U.S. was targeting Hemeti with sanctions for his role in systematic atrocities committed against the Sudanese people, and sanctioned 7 RSF-owned companies located in the United Arab Emirates and 1 individual for their role in procuring weapons for the RSF. The UAE has been covertly shipping weapons to the RSF, but hasn't stopped the Biden administration from pushing forward major arms sales to Abu Dhabi. Blinken's declaration that the RSF is committing genocide comes as he and other Biden administration officials are vehemently denying that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza, despite that becoming a consensus among leading human rights organizations. By supplying Israel with weapons and political support, the U.S. has enabled the mass slaughter of Palestinian women and children, including many infants, the systematic targeting of hospitals, a starvation blockade, and the demolition of entire cities to achieve ethnic cleansing. Palestinians detained by Israeli military have also faced rape and torture. And so, I think this designation for the RSF is just a way to distract from what is happening in Gaza. That way, when people talk about Gaza, others could say, "Oh, well, why don't you talk about Sudan and the RSF?" As if if you talk about one genocide, you have to talk about all of them, or it's just because you hate the Jews or are racist or something like that. So that's obviously absurd, but that is, I think, what the Biden administration's political angle, propaganda angle is here. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show. Again, this week, we will have one more episode of the Kyle Anzalone show out this week, and then a bonus episode of Conflicts of Interest come out over the weekend. Thanks, everyone.